The command room of the Zephyrian Harmony was bigger than most human cities. The walls curved up and disappeared into darkness above, covered with screens that showed star maps, fleet positions, and battle reports from across the galaxy. In the bay, center of this massive room, a holographic display stretched out like a glowing table the size of a football field. 3 alien commanders stood around the display, their voices echoing in the vast space. They had been here for 3 weeks straight, trying to solve a problem that seemed impossible. The red dots on the map kept moving closer to the blue ones, and nothing they tried seemed to work. Commander Vexhall was tall and thin, with silver skin that reflected the light from the hologram. His people, the Zephyrians, were known for being smart and careful planners. He moved his long fingers over the controls, adjusting fleet positions with the precision of a surgeon. Every movement was calculated, every decision based on thousands of years of military tradition. Admiral Thros looked like a walking tank made of metal and circuits. His mechanical voice buzzed when he spoke, translating thoughts into words through speakers built into his chest. The metallic confederation had turned themselves into machines long ago, believing that metal and computer chips were better than flesh and blood. His red sensor eyes scanned the display constantly, processing data at speeds no organic brain could match. Strategic Minister Quileth was the strangest of the 3. She looked like a walking tree with bark for skin and leaves that changed color with her moods. Right now, those leaves were a deep red, showing her frustration. The Botanical Alliance had mastered the art of patience, growing their strategies, slowly like plants growing toward the sun. But even their careful long-term thinking could not solve this puzzle. The Karathi have broken through Sector 7 again, Vexhall said, his voice smooth like flowing water. Our defensive grid cannot hold against their new attack pattern. Confirmed, Admiral Thros replied, his mechanical voice emotionless. My calculations show a 91.7% probability of complete defensive collapse within 14 standard cycles, if current trends continue. Minister Quileth's leaves rustled as she moved closer to the display. The roots of our strategy run deep, but the Karathi cut them faster than we can grow new ones. Perhaps we must plant different seeds. The 3 commanders had been saying similar things for weeks. The Karathi Empire was winning, and nobody could figure out how to stop them. The red enemy markers on the holographic map looked like a disease spreading through the galaxy, consuming everything in their path. The Karathi were not the strongest or the smartest race in the galaxy, but they were mean and clever. They had started this war by attacking 3 different sectors at once, forcing the Allied fleets to spread out thin. Now they were pushing deeper into Allied space, taking planets and star systems faster than anyone could respond. We need to move the 5th Fleet from Sector 12 to reinforce Sector 7, Vexhall suggested, moving his finger across the display. Blue dots representing thousands of ships began to shift. Negative, Admiral Thros said immediately. That would leave Sector 12 vulnerable to the Karathi 3rd wave. My probability matrices indicate a 67% chance they would exploit that weakness within 6 cycles. Then we redirect supply convoys from the inner systems, Minister Quileth offered, more resources for defensive installations. That would slow our production by 23%, Thros calculated. The economic impact would weaken our long-term strategic position. And so it went, around and around. Every solution created new problems. Every strength revealed new weaknesses. The aliens were incredibly smart, each one capable of calculations that would make human computers cry. But somehow all that intelligence was not enough. The Karathi kept winning. Jake Murphy stood near the wall, trying to stay out of the way. He was the human liaison officer, which meant his job was mostly to watch, listen, and report back to Earth Command. Humans were still new to this whole galactic war thing. Earth had only been part of the Alliance for 5 years, and most aliens still thought of humans as primitive newcomers who barely knew how to fly between stars. Jake did not mind being ignored. He had learned that aliens liked to talk through problems in ways that took forever. They would consider every angle, run thousands of calculations, and debate the smallest details for hours. It was thorough, but it was also painfully slow. What bothered him was that his little sister Katie was here too. She was supposed to be on a simple tour of Allied ships, part of some student exchange program. But the tour had been canceled when the war situation got worse, and now she was stuck on the Zephyrian Harmony, with nothing to do but watch aliens argue about military strategy. Katie Murphy was 19 years old, and should have been in college, back on Earth, studying engineering or computer science. Instead, she was sitting in a chair near the wall, looking bored out of her mind. She had been watching the aliens work for 3 days now, ever since Jake had been assigned to observe the command sessions. "This is taking forever," Katie whispered to her brother. "Shh," Jake whispered back. "These are the best strategic minds in the galaxy. They know what they're doing." Katie looked at the massive holographic display, watching the 3 alien commanders move dots around like pieces on a chessboard. The red Karathi markers looked aggressive and chaotic, while the blue Allied markers were arranged in neat, orderly formations. "It looks like a video game," she said quietly. "It's not a game, Katie. This is real war. Millions of lives depend on getting this right." Katie nodded, but she kept watching. She had grown up playing strategy games with Jake when they were younger. Their father had been deployed overseas a lot, and their mother worked double shifts at the hospital, so Jake and Katie had spent countless hours in the basement, playing every space combat simulator they could find. She remembered those games well. The way enemy fleets would move in patterns, trying to trick you into making mistakes. The way you had to think fast and adapt when your careful plans fell apart. The way the best strategies were often the simplest ones that nobody expected. Looking at the holographic display now, Katie started to see familiar patterns. The way the red Karathi markers were moving reminded her of something. She had seen this before in dozens of games with Jake. It was a classic strategy, so obvious that she was surprised the alien commanders had not noticed it. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe they were too smart, thinking too hard about complex solutions when the answer was simple. Katie shifted in her chair, studying the display more carefully. The more she looked, the more certain she became. She knew exactly what the Karathi were doing, and she knew how to stop them. The question was whether anyone would listen to a 19-year-old human girl when the greatest military minds in the galaxy could not solve the problem themselves. Katie Murphy could not stop staring at the holographic battle map. While the 3 alien commanders continued their endless debate about fuel calculations and supply line logistics, she saw something completely different. The red Karathi markers were not moving randomly at all. They were following a pattern that any human gamer would recognize in seconds. It was like watching someone play checkers while thinking it was chess, missing the obvious moves because they were trying to be too clever. "We must consider the gravitational effects of the binary star system in Sector 9, Commander Vexhall was saying, his silver fingers dancing over the controls. "Our fleet formations need to account for stellar drift patterns over the next 47 cycles." Katie almost rolled her eyes. Stellar drift patterns? The Karathi were not worried about stars moving slightly over the next 2 months. They were planning something that would happen in the next 2 weeks, maybe sooner. "My computations indicate that Admiral Thross is correct about the fuel efficiency ratings," Minister Quyleth added, her leaf-colored skin shifting to a thoughtful green. "However, we must also factor in the crew rest cycles for prolonged engagements. Botanical Alliance ships require 14-hour meditation periods for optimal performance." Katie bit her lip to keep from saying anything. Crew rest cycles? The Karathi were about to crush the entire Allied fleet, and these aliens were worried about nap time? She studied the map more carefully, tracing the movement patterns of the red enemy markers with her eyes. The Karathi had hit Sector 7 first, then Sector 12, then Sector 4. It looked random, but it was not. They were hitting specific points that forced the Allied fleets to spread out in a predictable way. It was exactly like the old strategy, game called Space Wolves that she and Jake used to play. The enemy would attack your weakest points not to capture them, but to make you move your strong pieces into bad positions. Then, when you were spread out and confused, they would hit you with everything they had in one massive attack. Jake, she whispered to her brother. Not now, Katie. They're trying to work. But I think I know what the Karathi are doing. Jake glanced at her with the tired look of an older brother who had heard his sister's theories before. Katie, these are military professionals with centuries of experience. They have computers that can calculate 1,000,000 possibilities per second. That's the problem, Katie said quietly. They're thinking like computers. She looked at the holographic display again. The Karathi attacks had created a pattern that was pushing all the Allied fleets toward the center of their defensive zone. It was like herding sheep, making them bunch up together where they would be easier to attack. The alien commanders could not see it because they were thinking about each battle separately. They saw the attack on Sector 7 as one problem, the attack on Sector 12 as another problem, and the attack on Sector 4 as a third problem. They were trying to solve each problem with careful planning and mathematical precision. But the Karathi were not playing 3 separate games. They were playing one big game, and all their attacks were parts of a single strategy. The enemy is using psychological warfare, Admiral Thross was saying, his mechanical voice echoing in the vast chamber. They attack randomly to create fear and confusion among Allied populations. No, Katie said, not quite under her breath. The 3 alien commanders stopped talking and looked at her. Jake's face went pale. He had told her a dozen times to stay quiet and not interfere with the military planning session. I apologize for my sister, Jake said quickly. She did not mean to interrupt. What did the young human say? Commander Vexhal asked, his silver eyes focusing on Katie with mild curiosity. Katie felt her heart racing. She was surrounded by the greatest military minds in the galaxy, aliens who had been fighting wars before Earth even had civilization. They were all staring at her now, waiting for her to explain herself. I said no, Katie repeated, standing up from her chair. They're not attacking randomly, it's not psychological warfare. Katie, Jake warned, but Katie was already walking toward the holographic display. She had played enough games to recognize the pattern, and she could not just sit there and watch. The aliens lose the war because they were overthinking everything. Look at the attacks, she said, pointing at the red markers on the map. Sector 7, then Sector 12, then Sector 4. You think each attack is separate, but they're not. They're all part of the same plan. Minister Quyleth's leaves rustled, with what might have been amusement. Young human, our strategic analysis computers have examined every possible connection between these attacks. There is no discernible pattern. That's because you're looking for complicated patterns, Katie said. But this is simple. Look where your fleets moved after each attack. She traced the movement of the blue Allied markers with her finger. After the attack on Sector 7, Allied reinforcements had moved from Sectors 5 and 9. After the attack, on Sector 12, more reinforcements had come from Sectors 10 and 14. After the attack on Sector 4, even more ships had been pulled from the outer defensive ring. They're hurting you, Katie said. Like pushing sheep into a pen. Every time they attack, you move your fleets exactly where they want them to go. Admiral Thross's red sensor eyes focused on the display, running new calculations. The probability of such coordination would require thinking like a human, Katie interrupted. You're all trying to solve this like a math problem, but war is not just math. Sometimes you have to think fast and take risks. Commander Vexhal moved closer to the display, his long fingers hovering over the controls. If your theory is correct, young human, what would be their next move? Katie studied the map, seeing the pattern complete itself in her mind. The Allied fleets were now clustered in the central sectors, exactly where the Karathi wanted them. All those careful defensive positions had been abandoned. The outer rim was nearly empty of Allied ships. They're going to hit you here, she said, pointing to a spot that looked completely safe. Sector 15. Your fleets are all bunched up in the middle now, so they'll come around the outside and attack your supply bases. Once they cut off your supplies, your big fleet in the center will be trapped. The 3 alien commanders stared at the map in silence. Their computers began running probability calculations on Katie's theory. My analysis indicates a 78% probability that the human child is correct, Admiral Thross announced after a few moments. The pattern recognition capabilities of Deathworld species are well documented, Minister Quileth said, her leaves shifting to a surprised yellow color. But I did not expect such tactical intuition in one so young. Commander Vexhal looked at Katie with new respect. If you are correct about their strategy, do you also have a suggestion for how to counter it? Katie grinned. Finally, someone was asking the right question. Katie stepped closer to the massive holographic display, her heart pounding. The three alien commanders were watching her now with complete attention. Jake looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, but Katie felt more confident than she had in days. If I'm right about what they're doing, she said, reaching toward the glowing controls, then stopping them is actually pretty easy. Wait, Commander Vexahal said, his silver hand moving to block her. These controls manage the positions of actual fleets, thousands of ships with millions of crew members. One mistake could what? Katie asked. Could lose the war? Because you're already losing it with your current plan. She looked at the map again, seeing it the way she had learned to see strategy games, not as a collection of numbers and calculations, but as a living puzzle where every piece affected every other piece. Look, you're thinking like this is some kind of math test where you have to show all your work and get the perfect answer, she said. But the Karathi aren't doing math. They're playing a game and they're beating you because you're too worried about making mistakes. Minister Quileth's leaves shifted to a curious orange color. What would you do differently, young human? Katie pointed to the central cluster of allied fleets. Right now, all your ships are bunched up here like scared sheep. The Karathi pushed you here on purpose so you'd be easy to surround. But what if you weren't actually scared? What if you were pretending to be trapped? She moved her hands over the holographic controls, and to everyone's surprise, they responded to her touch. The display was designed to work with any intelligent species, and apparently it considered 19-year-old humans intelligent enough. Blue fleet markers began to move under her guidance. But instead of the careful, precise movements, the alien commanders had been making, Katie's changes were fast and bold. She was moving entire fleets across multiple sectors in seconds. Katie, what are you doing? Jake asked, his voice tight with worry. I'm setting a trap, she replied, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. The Karathi think they're smart because they tricked you into clustering your fleets. But what if that's exactly where you want to be? She pulled fleet groups from the outer sectors, but not to reinforce the center like the aliens had been doing. Instead, she positioned them in hiding spots behind asteroid fields and nebula clouds. To anyone looking at the display, it would appear that the Allied defensive line was collapsing completely. This appears to be a full retreat, Admiral Thross observed, his mechanical voice concerned. You are abandoning our defensive positions. No, Katie said, continuing to move ships with the confidence of someone who had played this exact scenario 100 times before. I'm making it look like a retreat. There's a difference. She created what appeared to be a huge gap in the Allied defensive line, right in Sector 15 where she had predicted the Karathi would attack. The central fleet cluster looked even more isolated now, completely cut off from reinforcements. The enemy will see this as an opportunity, Commander Vexhal said. They will attack through that opening with everything they have. Exactly, Katie grinned. And when they do, they'll be flying straight into the biggest ambush in galactic history. She highlighted the hidden fleet positions she had created. Ships tucked behind asteroid belts in sectors 13 and 17. Reserve forces positioned in the shadow of a gas giant in Sector 16. Supply ships that looked like they were running away, but were actually moving into perfect positions to support a counterattack. When the Karathi come through here, she said, tracing the obvious attack route with her finger. These fleets hit them from both sides, and these reserve groups cut off their retreat. They'll be surrounded before they know what happened. The alien commanders studied her new formation in stunned silence. Their advanced computers began running probability calculations on Katie's strategy. The mathematics are unusual, Admiral Thross said after a few moments. This formation violates several fundamental principles of defensive warfare. Good, Katie said. If it followed your fundamental principles, the Karathi would see it coming. The whole point is to do something they don't expect. Minister Quyleth's leaves had turned a bright blue color that Katie had not seen before. The risk factors are enormous. If the enemy does not take the bait, our scattered forces will be vulnerable to defeat in detail. But if they do take the bait, Commander Vexhall said slowly, the probability matrices indicate a 84% chance of complete enemy fleet destruction. Katie nodded. That's the thing about taking risks. Sometimes you lose, but sometimes you win. Big. Your safe strategies were losing slowly. This strategy might lose fast or it might win everything. She stepped back from the display, leaving her formation glowing in the holographic space. The Allied fleets were positioned in a pattern that looked chaotic to the aliens, but made perfect sense to Katie. It was aggressive and risky and completely different from everything the galaxy's greatest military minds had tried so far. There's one more thing, she added. You have to move fast, like really fast. If you spend 3 days debating this and running calculations, the Karathi will figure out what you're doing. This only works if you do it now before they have time to adapt. Jake was staring at his little sister like he had never seen her before. Katie, do you realize what you just did? You just redesigned the entire galactic defense strategy in 30 seconds. It wasn't 30 seconds, Katie protested. I've been thinking about it for 3 days, watching you guys miss the obvious solution. Commander Vexhall touched his communication device. All fleet commanders, prepare for immediate strategic repositioning. Authorization code Zephyr 7 Alpha. Wait, Admiral Thross said. We are implementing the human-child strategy without further analysis? My sensors indicate that Karathi advance forces are already moving toward Sector 15, the mechanical admiral replied. If we are going to attempt this ambush, we must begin immediately. Minister Quyleth's leaves rustled with what might have been excitement or terror. The young Deathworlder is correct about timing. We must plant these seeds quickly before the soil conditions change. Katie watched as her formation began to come to life on the display. Real ships started moving to the positions she had chosen, carrying real people who were trusting their lives to a strategy created by a college student from Earth. She felt a moment of doubt. What if she was wrong? What if this was just a game, to her, but the aliens were right about the serious nature of real warfare? Then she looked at the Karathi advance markers beginning to move toward Sector 15, exactly as she had predicted, and her confidence returned. Jake, she said quietly, I think this is actually going to work. The command room fell silent as everyone watched the holographic display. Katie's formation was now active across 12 sectors of space, with thousands of ships moving into positions that looked completely wrong to every military textbook in the galaxy. Karathi main fleet detected entering Sector 15, Admiral Thross announced, his mechanical voice steady despite the tension. They are proceeding exactly as the human predicted. Katie watched the red enemy markers pour through. The gap she had created like water flowing through a broken dam. The Karathi commanders must have been celebrating, thinking they had found the perfect opportunity to crush the Allied fleet once and for all. Hidden Fleet Alpha is in position, Commander Vexhall reported. Hidden Fleet Beta moving to intercept. Coordinates. Reserve group standing by. Minister Quyleth's leaves had turned a nervous purple color. The enemy formation is larger than anticipated. They have committed nearly their entire force to this attack. Katie felt her stomach tighten. She had expected the Karathi to take the bait, but not with their whole fleet. If her plan failed now, it would not just be a small defeat. It would be the end of the war. That's actually good, she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. If they're bringing everything they have, then we can finish this war right here, right now. Jake moved closer to his sister. Katie, are you sure about this? There are no second chances if you're wrong. Katie looked at the display, watching. The red markers spread out as the Karathi fleet moved deeper into what they thought was Allied territory. They were flying straight into her trap, but they had brought so many ships that her ambush forces looked tiny by comparison. I'm sure, she said, though her voice shook slightly. This is exactly like the Battle of Thermopylae scenario in Galaxy. Commander. Small force, good position, enemy overconfident. We can do this. The 3 alien commanders exchanged glances. They had committed everything to a strategy created by a 19-year-old human who was comparing their real war to a video game. If they had not been so desperate, they would never have considered such a crazy plan. Karathi fleet has reached optimal ambush coordinates, Admiral Thross reported. All hidden forces are in position. Commander Vexhal looked at Katie. Young human, you designed this strategy. When do we spring the trap? Katie studied the holographic display, watching the enemy fleet spread out as they prepared to attack. The isolated Allied forces in the center. The Karathi were confident now, probably thinking this would be an easy victory. They had no idea what was about to happen. Wait for it, she said softly. Let them get a little closer. They need to be completely committed before we hit them. The red markers moved deeper into the trap. Katie could imagine the Karathi commanders right now, planning how they would divide up the conquered territories after their victory. They thought they were hunting sheep, not realizing they were walking into a wolf pack. Now, Katie said. Commander Vexhal activated the attack sequence. On the holographic display, blue markers suddenly appeared from behind asteroids and nebula clouds, surrounding the Karathi fleet from every direction. The enemy formation, which had looked so confident and organized just moments before, immediately began to break apart. Ships that had been flying in neat attack formation suddenly found themselves caught between multiple Allied fleets firing from all sides. Direct hit on Karathi command ship, Admiral Thross reported, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. Enemy fleet attempting to retreat, but escape routes have been blocked by reserve forces. Katie watched her strategy unfold exactly as she had imagined it. The Karathi were trapped in the center of her formation, just like she had trapped enemy fleets in countless video games. The difference was that this time real ships were being destroyed and real people were dying. The enemy fleet is requesting terms of surrender, Minister Quyleth announced, her leaves turning a bright gold color that Katie guessed meant happiness or relief. Already? Katie asked, surprised. But the battle just started. Karathi military. Doctrine emphasizes preservation of resources, Commander Vexhal explained. When facing certain defeat, they prefer to surrender and regroup rather than fight to the last ship. Katie nodded, though she felt a strange mix of emotions. She had won, but it had happened so fast that it felt almost anticlimactic. In video games, the final battles were always dramatic and took hours to complete. In real life, her perfectly planned ambush had ended the war in less than 20 minutes. Final casualty reports coming in, Admiral Thross said. Allied losses, minimal. Karathi losses, 73% of their total fleet capacity destroyed or captured. Remaining enemy forces surrendering across all sectors. The holographic display showed the results of Katie's strategy. Where there had been threatening red markers just an hour ago, there were now blue Allied forces in complete control of the battlefield. The war was over. Commander Vexhal approached Katie, his silver eyes showing something that might have been respect. Young human, your tactical solution has achieved what our greatest military minds could not accomplish in weeks of planning. How did you see what we could not see? Katie thought about the question seriously. I think it's because you were all trying to be too smart, she said finally. You have these amazing computers and thousands of years of military experience, so you kept looking for complicated solutions. But sometimes the best strategy is the simple one that nobody expects. There is wisdom in your words, Minister Quyleth said, her leaves now a peaceful green color. We became so focused on avoiding mistakes that we forgot how to take the risks necessary for victory. Admiral Thross processed this information with his mechanical brain. Human strategic thinking appears to incorporate intuitive pattern recognition with rapid decision-making capabilities. These traits likely evolved on your dangerous homeworld. Jake put his hand on Katie's shoulder. I can't believe my little sister just ended a galactic war. Katie grinned. It was just like playing Space Wolves with you when we were kids, except with real spaceships. Over the next few hours, as surrender documents were signed and captured, Karathi ships were secured. Word of Katie's achievement spread throughout the Allied fleets. The story of the human girl who had solved in seconds what the galaxy's best strategists could not solve in weeks became legend. Commander Vexhal offered Katie a position as strategic advisor to the Galactic Defense Council. Admiral Thras requested that she review the defensive strategies for 17 star systems that had been considered impossible to defend. Minister Quileth asked if she would be willing to teach her rapid decision-making techniques to other species. Katie looked at all these opportunities, then at her brother Jake, and made her decision. "I think I'll finish college first," she said. "But after that, yeah, I'd like to help." As the Zephyrian Harmony prepared to return to Allied space, Katie Murphy realized that her boring diplomatic tour had turned into the adventure of a lifetime. More importantly, she had learned that sometimes being human, with all their crazy risk-taking and pattern recognition abilities, was exactly what the galaxy needed.